reckon with, it kind of threw me off. You don't think about yourself in those terms. So, I'm glad that everyone was able to join us today and have this conversation. I think about a year ago, a little over a year ago, when DA Williams was actually running for office, we had the first conversation with people who were looking to run for DA at the time. And it was such a great conversation, and we felt like we got so much valuable information during the conversation that myself and Jason committed to having another conversation a year later, or a little while down the road, to just talk about if he was elected, what would happen. But in being in thought partnership with a lot of people in the community, what we came up with was a conversation around like, these individuals, DA Jason Williams, Judge Nandi Campbell, and 88 Tenee Felix, have been such champions on the other side for everybody in the community in their past roles as, you know, criminal defense attorneys and public defenders. And now going to the opposite side of the aisle, we like to say, how can you effectuate change from the other side? And we know that each of these folks had some really strong and ambitious goals going in and saying the things that they wanted to tackle and the things that they wanted to look at. So we just really wanted to be in conversation today to talk to them to say, hey, has that happened? Has it been easy? You know, we know that some things that we said initially or that were said initially haven't necessarily panned out in the way that we thought. I know the hot topic with DA Williams definitely, and we'll get to that soon, is his choice to be able to not allow children to be charged as an adult. And he had to make a difficult decision to charge someone as an adult. And how did he come to that process? I think a lot of times people are just saying, oh, you said you weren't to do this and you wouldn't do that. But we never even take the time to hear about like how that decision was made and how hard or how painful it may have been. So we definitely want to have that conversation and give everybody an opportunity to talk about the things that they have experienced, what the challenges have been, and what's next, and how we want to continue to be progressive and expansive in working in a different capacity. So I'm glad everyone was able to join us today. We're going to give everybody like a minute to introduce themselves. I don't believe in biographies because I think it's a lot of things on paper, but people will introduce themselves by the things that are important to them. So I like to give people the respect to introduce themselves by what is important to them, not what I feel is important. And we'll give each person a minute to introduce themselves, and then we'll start in conversation. I just want to say we also are online. So if you see me looking at the computer, it's because we have a specific question for our online. We have a virtual event online as well. And we want to make sure that those individuals feel included as well. So please eat. And as Satra mentioned, we do have 2 mixers for today that Justini Cocktails, Miss Jessica designed especially for us. And then we also have, you know, regular beverages. So enjoy. And at the end, we will definitely allow you all to join the conversation. So thank you. We can start with you.
All right. I'm glad that we were able to close the loop on this. During the campaign, when you hosted, we're in this room over here?
Upstairs.
It was literally the realest conversation we had on the campaign trail. A lot of folks wanted to talk about certain topics, but you went so much deeper into the nuances of really what is important to community. I'm Jason Williams, I'm the DA here in Orleans Parish. I'm a dad. I'm a mother of a 22-year-old woman, a 15-year-old boy, and a 3.5-year-old boy. I've been a lifelong criminal defense attorney, small business owner in the community. Was born here, and I had the opportunity to grow up in 2 cities, so Atlanta and New Orleans. And I was able to see what it was like growing up in those 2 places. And I'll get into a little bit more about why that affects some of the things that I do.
Thank you.
My name is Nandi Campbell. I am the judge of Section G, Orleans Parish Criminal Court. I originally went to law school at 33 to become a public defender, moved down here to be a public defender. If I don't have the robe on, I like to be called Nandi and not Judge.
Point taken, Nandi. Let's go.
My name is Tenee Felix. I am a assistant district attorney now. I was formerly a juvenile defense attorney for a little over 12 years. I knew going into law school that I wanted to work with children. I wanted to defend children. I did it with a lot of passion. I made a decision fairly recently that I wanted to do more. I wanted to do more for kids. And as much as I could help all of the individual kids that I represented, I knew that there was more that I could do. And so I made the move, came over to the new administration, and we're doing a lot of great things for these kids. And I'm really happy with the work that our administration's been able to do so far.
Okay, well, Tenee,
Yes,
I want to make sure, because I'm calling you Tenee, you should have corrected me, Tenee. Yeah. I love to make sure I'm pronouncing people correct because people butcher mine all the time. So if I say anything wrong, please correct me. So Tenee, I definitely want to start with you. I think that a lot of the issues that we have in the community currently, as it relates to like our children getting involved in different things. I hear you when you said that you feel like you've done a lot of great work and you've been able to do a lot of different things in your new role as an ADA, but tell me a little bit about that, because from time to time you do have to recommend or prosecute children and recommend that they may be involved in a criminal legal system or be placed in prison. So how do you as a person for the last 12 years reconcile that this is like a part of the job as well when you fought so hard and so long to keep children out of the system?
So one of the things that was really difficult for me as a juvenile defense attorney was seeing how children and families were treated in juvenile court. A lot of times, they weren't treated with dignity, they weren't treated with respect. A lot of children, it seemed like to me, were just sort of being thrown away, right? They're the worst of the worst. We're gonna send them off to facilities and then society doesn't have to deal with them. And that was the end of it. And so one of the things that I was very passionate about coming into the district attorney's office was expanding our diversion program for children, right? We all know that children are going to make mistakes. That's by virtue of the fact that they're children. They make bad decisions, right? But not every single child needs to be juvenile justice involved as a result of having made mistakes. And so what the juvenile diversion program does is it allows children who come into the juvenile justice system to be diverted back into the community, get services from the community, right? It allows them to be helped by the people who are surrounding them. And what the research shows is that children who are diverted by the juvenile justice system do exponentially better than children who are kept in the juvenile justice system. Another focus was trying to reduce, so there were a lot of children who were in custody, and they were in custody beyond the point of rehabilitation because of a lot of plea deals that they had taken, and they had juvenile life sentences, but a lot of these children were doing so well, right? A lot of them had GEDs and didn't have anything else to do in secure care. A lot of them had never gotten written up for years, but they were still in secure care. And so one of the things that we did is we went back and we looked at these plea deals and we made determinations on which kids can successfully be moved back into the community. And so we were able to do that with a lot of the children who had already done many, many years in secure care. I think that we need to recognize that children do need to be held accountable, but we need to hold them accountable in ways that are developmentally appropriate, in ways that they're going to learn from, in ways that they're going to grow.
Thank you for that. And definitely, you said a lot of things that I think that people can relate to, as it relates to like, it's amazing that, as a prosecutor, you can sit here and actually call them kids and children, and not humanize them, taking away like who they are and their humanity in that process. So just really appreciate you for that. Nandi, I hadn't had the opportunity to work with you a lot prior to, maybe the last 2 years or so, but everywhere I went and you were there, I remember the first time I went with Dolphin to your Christmas party. And you walked through there and you were like a force to be reckoned with. Everybody was like, oh, I love Nandi. I'm like, who is this woman with this New York accent that all these people from New Orleans just like love and like, they want her to take their case and they want her to fight for them in court. Like, who is she? And I started doing a little research and talking to folks about you. And the one thing that I came across consistently was like the type of attorney you were, that you cared for families, that people really felt like you showed up for them and you fought irrespective of whatever it was that you were fighting against. So when you decided to run for judge, I was like, oh my God, yes, that's gonna be amazing. But then on the same side, I'm like, I don't know how hard that's gonna be for you as an individual, because like you were one of the people on the front lines. Like I felt like you scream abolition just as loud as I do, like saying there's no need for systems and all of these things. So to put on a black robe and then have to have instances where you also have to send people to prison, knowing what some of your foundational beliefs are, how do you reconcile that?
So thank you. It's a Brooklyn accent, first of all.
I'm sorry. Brooklyn is in the all right. I'm sorry. I should know better.
The transition was important for me. So first of all, my base, my upbringing, my father was an activist before there was this label of activist. So I was born and raised in a family where we didn't sit around and talk about injustices. My father packed us up and took us to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge protesting injustices. So that is my upbringing. My upbringing is one where my dad was a change maker in Brooklyn, and so it's sort of in my DNA and blood. Also, what pushed me to the legal field, the Central Park Joggers case, was one that lit a passion in me. Prior to that, I had been doing banking and management, and I was void of any passion of the work I was doing. And so when I moved here and I started doing this work, it was important to me, one, that I was not just processing people through the system, but I was connecting with people and families so that I understand why individuals were in the system. And so when I decided to run for judge, it was important to me, one, I saw the writing on the wall. I saw that we were about to enter this era of reform, right? And I have to say, one of the persons who kind of made me believe that it was coming was Will Snowden, right? And if you hadn't seen Will do his, I call him, well, I don't want to embarrass him, but it made me believe that it was coming. When I saw different communities come together to pass the non-unanimous jury situation, I was empowered, right? And one of the things I noticed and people don't understand is that judges don't have power in Louisiana. If you read the statute, we are void of power. I can't dismiss a case. I can't call a case. It's basically nothing I can do. And one of the first things that hit me when I took the bench was I kept going back and forth to why we had to wear these robes, right? It was something I kept reading up on. I didn't understand it. I don't understand why we have to sit on these high perches. And I did a lot of investigation. I made a decision not to wear my robe. And one of the things that I noticed was that there was a lot of separation from the judges and the people who we see before us. And some of the things that separate us is this title judge, this black robe, the fact that we sit high up. And so for me, the transition is hard because I really enjoyed screaming and yelling at the DAs and holding them accountable and having my clients understand that I was going to go to war for them. But what I understand is that in order to make this reform happen, we need people to make this transition. And we need people to make a transition in a way that we are uniting the system and not separating it. So if you come in my court, you will not see me wear a black robe. I do not wear a robe. And before I talk to your attorneys, I'm going to greet you and I'm going to say good morning to you. And I want to have a relationship with individuals where they are not showing up to Section G thinking that we are doing things that we have always done and the same way we have always done. So it's important, and for me, I use this year to kind of set a tone of humanity in Section G. And I believe that that is the start because I've had a hard time implementing a lot of programs because of 2021, but it gave me the opportunity to kind of lay the foundation of humanity and respect, something I believe was missing in Section G for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I think it's the one thing that I can say that I felt like I heard in Tenee's explanation as well as yours is that y'all do have a big heavy focus on humanity and giving people what they deserve and to be treated like human beings. And I think that that is a basis for being able to draw that unity that you were just talking about. So again, I appreciate you for the work that you do as well. So now the only man on the panel, let's go. Mr. Jason Williams. For me, you know, I told you when we had that initial conversation, I was like, I'm not necessarily sure I know who you are as a person. And that was something that I was struggling with in the conversation that we had in reconciling. And your response, I always remember, is like you told me is that you show up and fight for the underdog or who it is that you identify. You don't necessarily have any and for a better word, loyalties, but you don't have like one thing that you're just focused on. You want to find the underdog in each situation and like support them. So I felt like for me, that was so profound when you said that, and it allowed me to start looking at you in a different way to say, okay, you know, and I go back to like some of the things that have happened with your clients and how you fought for them and you've gone above and beyond as well when you were in your defense practice as well. I've always had this notion that the prosecutor's job is to put people in jail. You know, like that is what I've been taught. That is what I've learned. That is the only thing that I have ever known. And to hear you speak about the office in the way that you do and some of the things that you want to bring to the office, for me, I'm like, I don't know if that should necessarily be in the DA's office. That should remain in community. You shouldn't be doing this. But you are so passionate about your vision for the office and what you see that you can do from there. So in the same way that I asked them, how can you reconcile keeping people from out of the criminal legal system to now your sole purpose is how I say it, but I've been corrected multiple times on the sole purpose of the DA, but your sole purpose is to prosecute cases. How do you reconcile that switch? I feel like yours has been a huge jump from who you were before to today.
You know, it's the same calling, it's the same job. I became, and I wanted to become, and law school's hard, and you go through it. I wanted to become a criminal defense attorney, because I did not like the way that the system treated people. It treated people unfairly, and that includes perpetrators, defendants, guilty, not guilty, and victims. And I ran to become the DA of Orleans Parish because I did not like the way the system was treating people, defendants, victims, guilty, not guilty, and victims. It is the same work. And some people say, you know, it's a job of a prosecutor to put people in jail. I say it's a job of a prosecutor to seek justice because, you know, when you talk about the job being to put people in jail or decide who to prosecute, what's getting left out of that conversation is DAs across this country also decide who not to prosecute. And oftentimes those are rich and connected folks. And they find these wonderful reasons why not to do it. They began the Ahmaud Arbery trial this week, did jury selection last week. But for social media, but for a global pandemic, right? Keeping everybody in one place, closing banking, closing restaurants, closing conventions, everybody sitting at home, either looking at TV or looking at a device. It allowed us to look at the one thing that a global pandemic couldn't stop, which is American racism, right? And if we were all busy with all of our distractions,
y si todos estábamos
things that we do,
distraídos,
hard
ocupados
things
con
that we
cosas
have to
del diario
do, raising kids, going to school,
cosas de la crianza de nuestros
we
hijos,
might
en
not have
nuestras
had the
escuelas,
time and
etcétera,
space
etcétera.
and
Tal vez
patience
no teníamos el tiempo,
to see
el momento,
them
la paciencia para poder
overlooking
darnos cuenta
a kid who was
de que
going for a
no se
job,
están fijando
getting
en un
murdered
niño
going for a job.
que se
And
fue
the
asesinado cuando
prosecutor
iba
in that
camino hacia
town
un
was
trabajo
prepared to
y
do
el
nothing about it
fiscal en ese pueblo
because
estaba
the
haciendo
people
nada al
who took his
respecto
life, hunted him down,
porque la persona que le quitó la vida
or former law enforcement.
lo
So
cansados
I don't see
de
the
la
jobs
realidad
as
del
very
contexto
different,
policial.
you know.
Entonces veo como los trabajos de un
It
punto de
is
vista muy
truly
diferente.
seeking justice.
Es realmente lo que es
I don't even use the
buscar
term
lo que es
criminal justice
justicia.
system because this
Y
system has
estoy
not
usando
lived
el
up
sistema
to the
de
term justice.
justicia
I call it criminal
criminal
legal system.
porque este sistema
Being a
no
defense
ha
attorney, you can
vivido, no ha
represent
llegado
one
a los
client at a
estándares
time
de
in
que es
court.
justicia, sino
And
es
I
un
made
sistema criminal
49
legal.
on Tuesday. And I
Yo
felt like I'm running out
cumplo
of time. I only have so
49
many
el martes y
ticks on this
siento que
planet
no
left, so
tengo
many
el
days.
tiempo
So
en estos días en este
we
planeta
got to get into
disponibles.
the business of real
Entonces
system
tenemos
change.
que hacer
And
un cambio del sistema en sí
you can affect a lot more people's
y
lives from
pueden
within the
afectar a
system
muchas más
than you
personas.
can from outside of the system, handling cases one at a time.
Y
So that brings us to the question of the discussion as a whole. How do you feel like you can effectuate change from the inside versus the outside, or how do you think that you can accomplish that? I know, just staying with you really quickly, you know, I've had an opportunity to work with the office in different places. And tell me your thought process about asking, you know, Tenee to switch over, or individuals like Emily Moore leading your civil rights division, and like the thought around how you were asking people to come and start working from the inside with you, and how did you come to, you know, I mean, like, how did you convince them to do it? You know, because
That was the harder part.
you know, Emily, you know, specifically, you know, all her work that I've known, I had an opportunity with her at the Innocence Project, and just being a fan of hers from, you know, the outside. And then she's in the district attorney's office. I was like, what happened? You know? How did you do this? You know, and you know, she began to realize to me like how many cases they have been able to clear since she's been there, some of the rights that they have been able to wrong, and all of these large numbers of folks that are now either released or have a reduced sentence and are coming out. And she's like, you know, a good day at the Innocence Project was 2 people in a year, you know, but in the DA's office, it's 80, you know, people whose sentences we have somehow changed or lessened or have gotten them released. And I still feel like I'm not doing enough, you know? So just tell me about your thought process, and also bringing like-minded folks with you inside of your office.
So one of the hits against me when I was running for office, oh, you've never prosecuted before, right? And you know, some of the people who had done that job before, or had worked on that side of the coin, or were police officers, what have you, they might say, well, you need to know how we've been doing it, right? The way Harry Connick did it, the way Leon Canizero did it. Their policies, their decision-making, their thinking led New Orleans to have the highest incarceration rate per capita in the world, while seeing violent crime and all sorts of crime numbers continue to go up. So throwing people in jail, as many as you could in a year, using habitual offender law so they can serve as much time as possible, whether it was Mr. Noble spending close to 8-9 years in jail for 2 joints, whether it was another individual getting multiple bail because he stole an umbrella off a porch when it was raining. I mean, these are the sorts of things that were happening. So I don't think you should be able to be in charge of a system that you have run poorly with bad practices for so long. This is what is wrong with the system. And so I wasn't searching for people who had been steeped and trained in the things that led us to be the highest incarceration rate, also have the highest exoneration rate per capita at the same time, right? Doubling down on mass producing convictions that had no integrity. And so it was really important to find people who were willing to say, all right, not how can we tweak this thing a little bit. You can't tweak something a little bit that is so fundamentally broken. You have to say, how can we fundamentally transform this thing and redesign it? And Tenee and Emily were not born out of this Harry Connick way of thinking. They weren't born out of a police state way of thinking. They were born out of a fact that a person's worst decision does not make up who they are, right? And so they come into this work as creatives, right? They come into this work building new systems that can outlive them, right? We might get COVID. We might not live another a year. But if we can change a system, then anybody could come in there, follow the system, and make sure that it never treats people the way they did before. So there was a lot of begging that went into it. There was a lot of committing to never call them a prosecutor, but to only call them chiefs or ADAs, right? And there was a very real commitment that I would never have them do something that they were fundamentally against. You know, I may be the DA, they may consider me their boss, but they are my thought partners in building a better system. So it wasn't easy, but I do think that they have been able to see that a prosecutor, I take it back, an ADA, right, can do more by bringing more humanity to this criminal legal system than a lawyer can in terms of number of people that you can deliver that humanity to.
So I'm not gonna get in my soapbox about systems right now.
Okay.
I'm gonna save it for later.
Thank you.
All right. Nandi, I want to give you an opportunity because I feel like, you know, when you were in the courtroom, people were able to hear you loud and clear about how you were fighting for your clients. I want to give you the opportunity right now, if you could think over this last year, what is the hardest case that you have had to, you know, deal with? Like, what is that thing that gave you pause to say, man, did I make the right decision? Or, you know, that gave you some type of like, you know, down in your stomach. So what has been one of the hardest things you've had to face since you've been on the bench?
So first I want to talk about terminology because you use this terminology inside and outside. And so it's important, I teach a criminal law seminar at Loyola Law. It's important to empower people to understand that they have the power. It's their system. They are on the inside. They just haven't utilized their power. So one of the things in Section G that's important, and I haven't had that moment, is because I found that even the sentencing, like I had to, there's a lot of, Jason's office gives me a lot of discretion in sentencing. And we have been thoughtful about how we do it. I feel like I have staff who bought into this whole humanity perception in Section G. And what we have done is ask that defense attorneys do mitigating practicing, meaning we require a mitigation memo before I sentence. So I don't want to base my sentencing on solely the case itself. I want to know your background. I want to know where you're from. I want to know your school history. I want to know your family history. I want to know information that should factor into sentencing. They do this on a regular basis in federal court, right? And so I noticed that in my practice, there was never a conversation when it came to sentencing about who the individual was. We learn a lot about who the victim is, right? And this to me does not disregard the victim. It allows me to get the aggravating information, the mitigating information, and provide a sentence that's based on that information. And so what I do in sentencing to avoid that kind of, Ms. Campbell, you suck, let me throw some tomatoes at her as I'm leaving the courtroom, is that I explained to the defense attorney how I came to my conclusion. The first case I had to do a sentencing for were these two young men. They were students at St. Aug at the time. That's how they met, and they were both college students. And they were at a recording studio at Suno, and they were playing with guns, and one shot the other. And so it was a negligent homicide, and basically was about whether or not this individual was going to go to jail or whether he was going to get probation. And so I factored a lot into my decision, and I ended up giving probation, but I also ended up having the individual pay for funeral costs. It was really important to me that it was an accident, but that family should not incur the funeral costs for their loved one based on this individual's behavior. And so I try to be mindful so that for me, sentencing is not about I am punishing you, right? That's not the sole purpose of sentencing. And I think that if we as judges make sure that we're factoring in that these two individuals belong to the community, I'm talking about the defendant and the victim, and we're balancing out mitigating versus aggravating, then I hope I'm not in a position where I am so distraught about my sentence that I can't move forward. That's to be said, I have not had to sentence anybody to life. And I hope that when that time comes, we have moved the system to a place where this person was afforded every opportunity of a great judicial system. And that means there was no cheating. Everybody followed the rules. We preserved that individual's rights. We had a jury who is now has to be unanimous. And then I will feel better knowing that they came through a system that was built on a humane foundation. And so I would be able to sleep at night knowing that the outsiders who are now insiders are going to continually fight to change the system that don't appeal to them.
Yeah, that was very well said. I think we all can learn better ways of speaking and terminology. You know, we fight for it in our community all the time, but I think we also have to really acknowledge the fact of like someone who has been on the other side of the table. You know, you are put there to be disempowered and dehumanized, and you don't feel like an insider. You don't feel like you have the power to fight. And then the people that you trust to fight on your behalf don't always have your best interests in the forefront either. So I think that the way that you're talking about how you're building a community inside of your courtroom is like absolutely amazing. And I would love to learn how to speak about it in a different way, because I know that in conversation with my community and the folks that we talk to, that is not how we felt when we were sitting on the other side of that table. And your courtroom might be the only place right now, but you know, they feel a little different. So I would love to come in and learn so we can teach our community what to ask for, or what it is that they need, or how they should be treated, or what support we could provide for them to feel empowered, if that is ever the case that they have to be on the other side of that table. So I appreciate learning, and I feel like you just taught me something, so thank you for that. Tenee, for you, especially when it comes to like our kids, I know I had to reconcile that I get up and I do this work every single day. And I believe in abolition. I believe that prison should not exist. I don't believe in creating systems and just like all of these things. But I found myself even in the folks that I decided to help or work with, anytime it came to a crime against a child or having to do with a child, like I found myself stepping back in judgment and being like, I don't know, if I can help this person, or, so I had to come to terms with the fact that, like, no one sin is greater than the other. Everyone deserves a chance. If we're going to provide these services, we provide them to everyone. And who am I to judge when I needed to be forgiven as well, right? And we all need to be forgiven on a daily basis. So I have a special place, even with children who commit particular crimes, because I feel that their lives have been just torn apart from the time they got here to the time that they show up in the juvenile system. And that, a lot of times their life is so short, but the snapshot is never taken into consideration that by the time a child is 5 years old, they have had X, Y, Z trauma. And now they're here at 10, and like, what else did you expect, So I know that you said that like diversion is something that is really important to you, but like outside of diversion, because I know the office, even though it's not, you're saying like your only job is not to punish, there's and I hate to say accountability, but some type of something that's put in place to say, this is what happens to you because of this particular action. How do you also make sure that you're involved in like care and concern for those kids and the things that they've been through? I had an opportunity to work with a 17-year-old. He was at school. He was on an ankle monitor, and his charge was a charge of having to do with a sex crime or whatever. And they had him ostracized, sitting off on one side of the room. He had to have a person with him the whole time. And I just walked up to him and I was like, "How are you doing?" And he was like, "I'm okay, ma'am." And I was like, "What do you need? How do you feel?" And he just broke down in tears. And he was like, "My child." I had to hug him and rub his back. And what I knew in that moment is that he had been drugged through the system, and nobody ever asked him, like, what happened to him? So in the way that you're creating the culture inside of your office or the things that you control, how are you also making sure that you are acknowledging that these are children and acknowledging the trauma and the things that they've been through as well?
I think that is a really great question. It was something that I focused a lot on when I was on the defense side. We know that the children in particular in New Orleans have suffered a lot of trauma, right? From Hurricane Katrina to whatever might be going on in their families. They've seen people shot, they've seen people killed, they've seen domestic violence. I try to educate all of the ADAs who are in the juvenile division. DA Williams and I had a conversation about, the fact that being in the juvenile division is an expertise, right? Because you have to know adolescent brain development. You have to know how trauma affects children. You have to know, and then you have to react in the appropriate way, right? What we know is that a lot of children who commit sex offenses, those were the kinds of cases that I hated the most as a defense attorney, but a lot of them are victims themselves. And that needs to be factored in terms of what's going to happen with them moving forward, right? We can't just throw these children away. I believe in the potential of every single child. Every single child has potential. And I believe that, if we work together as a community, if we want to build stronger and safer communities, we need to acknowledge that children, can be held accountable in ways that can make them learn, in ways that can make them grow. The juvenile assistant district attorneys have all been looking at cases through the lens of not only trauma, but also adolescent brain development, right? A lot of them, all of them come to me and talk through cases and they tell me mitigating information. We do have open lines of communication as much as possible with the defense attorneys who, like Nandi said, she asked for mitigating packets. I've done that with defense attorneys. Like, tell me what's going on with your kid so that we can make a better decision about what should happen. And so I think that as long as, everyone is committed to being very conscious of what a child might have gone through, we can make the system work for these children, and we can get better outcomes for these children, and we can get better, more productive citizens as they get older and come into the community.
Absolutely. Jason, of course, going back to just the case of question, and I told you I wanted to make sure that we talked about this and gave you opportunity to talk about like how you came to the decision of, one of the things you said when you were running, that you wouldn't charge any child as an adult, and then having to go back on that promise or that statement that you made. I know you and I have talked about it, it didn't come easy. And that you put a lot of thought into it, and, without going into like circumstances of the case or anything like that, like, what was that like for you as a person, knowing that you had to go back on that? And then what made you decide ultimately to charge the young person as an adult? And moving forward, how do you feel like you will address those particular situations?
It was, it's probably the hardest moment for me, not as a DA or a lawyer, but as a dad, as someone who has a son, same complexion I have, with dreadlocks, who grew probably 4 inches during this COVID pandemic, meaning he was 2 inches shorter than me when we found out about COVID. Now he's about 2 inches taller than me now. And so when he walks through this community, people see a man. He has the same brain development he had when he was 2 inches shorter than me. But this community, this America sees a man. And so it was not the hardest decision. It is still the hardest thing that I struggle with. Tenee and I got here when we got here because we had a meeting that started very early today about this issue with defense attorneys, with Ernest from Mbutu Village, with stakeholders in this communities who are helping us still figure this out, because the system is not created in a way to properly serve our kids. And what the public gets isn't always accurate. If you don't watch the news, you're uninformed. If you watch the news, you're misinformed. So I thank God for people like Milo who do documentaries, because that really is a long journalism. They're not writing news stories anymore. They're trying to get people to pay them for advertising dollars. So they want to say something that is shocking, right? So at a time when we were moving all of these cases back to juvenile court, that the last administration moved over that were not homicides, right? We're moving all these things back. And then we have this other situation of killings. And technically, a couple of these cases would qualify under the definition that exists as a mass shooting, because there's multiple people who were killed and others that were injured. And I absolutely realize the status of adolescent brain development. To be honest with you, I'm not sure that your brain is fully developed when you're 25. I mean, I got some buddies right now in their 40s I'm still worried about them, okay? But when I'm talking to the parents of the young person who bled out and died on the basketball court because another young person took their life, and the system, if the case stayed in juvenile court, would allow that person to be out in 3 years' time when the science says that, they could find themselves making the same bad decision after being released. It's tough. And we have not figured it out yet. We are still trying to figure it out, whether that is some sort of, now what we do know is a kid should never be housed with adults because they're going to be preyed upon, right? So they should be in juvenile custody. But we need to figure out, and that whether it's a legislature or whether it's through working with Tenee and the defense bar and expert leaders, to figure out an appropriate way. And I know you said you don't like that word necessarily, accountability, but if I'm dealing with Xavier at 3 years old, or Graham at 15 years old, there's different ways that I have to hold them accountable to make sure they're good human beings when they go out in the world on their own. And that really needs to be our goal when it comes to young people. And I'm still struggling to make sure that we can figure out a way to do that. It is not perfect. It won't be perfect. We know that life in prison is not appropriate for a young person, regardless of what they've done, because I think Danny used the term incompetent. The only analogy would be like if someone is mentally incompetent. A kid comes to court probably every time, regardless of the setting, saying, am I going home today? Where's my mom? Am I going home today? Where's my mom? That's their understanding of the system. And now it takes, the way the system is set, it might take 3 years before there's a resolution to the case. And so everybody, whether it's a teacher or expert, says, if a young person does something wrong, you need the accountability measure, the punishment, to happen in close proximity to the thing. So we are still working on what is right for this community and what is right for our children, because I still see these children, whether they be defendants or not, as mine. And it still is the hardest thing. It is the thing that wakes me up at night and gives me pause and trouble sleeping. But yeah, I mean, this is the heaviest thing I've ever had to deal with.
When I say I don't like accountability, just to give you some clarity, I feel like the things that we design should not be designed with accountability in mind. So we should be designing things that are rooted in love, care, and concern. And that is how we design things, in love, care, and concern. And then I feel like accountability is a given if we're designing the systems in that way. But if we're designing something with just accountability in mind, it becomes punitive, and then that's what happens. Yeah. So when I say I don't like accountability, for me, it's not necessarily the word in of itself, but it's how we create things with accountability in mind. So there's already this assumption that if accountability is the end goal, there's some type of punishment, there's some type of negative connotation that is going to occur as it relates to us making sure that all we're moving toward is accountability. Yeah. And I think that a lot of times when we talk about accountability, we're talking about this measure or this metric to punish people for not doing what it is that they should be doing. So I think about if we really talk about what you're designing to get an outcome of people being present and doing what it is that they say that they're going to do and showing up in ways that they should be showing up. If then the definition of accountability happens.
It's funny that you say it that way. I think that is exactly why I sought after, begged, and pleaded for the fiercest juvenile defense attorney in this community to be the chief of the juvenile division, because she saw accountability exactly that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything that I could say about, even Tenee's work too, is that, that is how I feel with her and her care and concern for the children. So I think that, by starting in that frame, the end result is the same result that we're all looking for. Time, where are we on time?
5 minutes.
Okay.
That was quick. It's always so quick.
But I mean, you still got a few minutes to talk. We want to make sure that it ain't just us talking at people, even though I could be in conversation, I feel like with y'all all day. The last thing that I just want to address really quickly is, if there's one thing that you feel that you have not been able to address that was on your list that you thought you would have gotten to by now. Because the other thing I want to definitely raise up is that it's easy for me to say what I wouldn't do if I was in your shoes. And I would like to think that I would just walk in and shut all the prisons down if I had the power to do so, as Nandi just, said that what we have power to do and not do. But there's one thing that you thought within your first year, you absolutely would have had accomplished, had that title in and say, I did that, but haven't even been able to address it. What is it?
Wow, that's up. So I'll be here too long if I talked about the number of individuals that are sitting in jail that shouldn't be there. And they fall into a bunch of different categories. I think I would probably say defend myself, right? Because when I announced that I wanted to do this work and I want to make system-wide change and upend this system, I began to get investigated. And then the week before qualifying, I was indicted. And the first day of early voting, Bill Barr, Donald Trump's head of DOJ, came down and gave a speech at a hotel saying, do not elect progressive prosecutors. That is against what Donald Trump wants from policing and the criminal legal system. And because of COVID, I haven't had a chance to go to court and fight my case, right? So that's the one thing I would say I haven't been able to do that I thought I would have been able to put down and get back to the business of serving the people.
Absolutely. Nandi, same question.
So one of the things that's really important to me that I wanted to start off right away is find a way that I am going to continuously engage in the community. It's important for me that the community adopts the criminal legal system in a way where it's accessible, in a way where we, as what we call ourselves, the G unit, are ingrained in the community. It's important to me. So because of COVID and because of different things in 2021, we have not been able to solidify our community engagement. I laugh because one of the things, I live in Central City, and this was a big problem for the Supreme Court security guy that I live literally in Central City. And what's important, and what I found out in the last couple of months with me having these conversations in my neighborhood with different people, was that people they don't feel like they could be present, right? They feel like this is a building that you have to go through security, they can't come in. And so one of the things that I did was ensure that my section of court is open to 4:00. My staff don't necessarily like it, but I want to be able to ensure that if you have something in Section G, that we're not just here and finish the docket and go get our nails done, but somebody is in Section G every day of the week from 8:30 in the morning to 4:00 in the afternoon. And so what's really important to me, and the thing that I want to do and wish I could have accomplished this week, is to identify and kind of lay the groundwork for how Section D is going to engage in the community. We are definitely working on it, and that's something that's important to me for 2021, 2022.
For me, so I already mentioned that one of the things I really want to do is build up the diversion program in the DA's office. One of the ways that I thought that I would have accomplished it a little bit better by now is by having engaged a lot more community organizations to be able to work with the kids. I do believe that empowering the community, a lot of times, kids are become system involved because people who are charged with sort of taking care of these children divest themselves of responsibility, right? And so there might be a fight at school. And instead of the school dealing with it, they call the police. And now the child is in the juvenile justice system, right? Or a kid is not happy with what mom is telling him and punches a hole in the wall. And so then mom calls the police and the kid gets arrested for simple criminal damage, right? And so I think that there are ways that we can sort of put some of this power back into the community to help these children. And I think community programs is one of the ways to do that. And while we have partnered with a lot of great organizations, I, at this point, would have wanted to partner with so many more. But I know that it takes time. Everything can't happen overnight. We have a lot of programs that had previously never been even considered by the district attorney. Restorative justice is a huge thing that works with children. And so now we are able to get kids into restorative circles with, survivors and victims. And that's huge, right? Because that's where, victims come out of circles feeling sort of more empowered and they feel better about how the system worked for them. So I'm hopeful moving forward very quickly, we can engage many more community programs for children, hopefully very soon.
Absolutely. I want to thank you all tremendously for coming and being in conversation with me today. And now I want to be able to open up questions to the audience online and in person. Oh, it's behind me. You snuck that in. So I'll start with anyone here first who has a question. No, I'll speak at once.
I have a question. I was just trying to figure out how to word it. When you're talking about partnering with organizations, and I'm not really thinking of an organization. I'm thinking of like, is there some sort of a peer support system that you have for the kids, like ones who've already been in the system, done their time, came out, have done better, to be set up with the kids who are coming in, not quite following the protocol or what. And if I've done it and I've been successful, maybe I can reach that kid who's having a hard time or being more combative, not physically, but can't think, contradictory or something. Like, I think that I would be more receptive to my own peers that are trying to do the right thing, and can tell me how they managed to like change their mindset. What was the process for them? If it took them a long time or a short time, and I may say to myself that, well, if he or she did it, maybe I can too. So is it just organizations, or is there some sort of peer support, peer-to-peer?
Right.
program?
So I've always thought, when I was a defense attorney, that something like that would be really, really amazing, because I've, represented kids and who I've stayed in touch with who, are then in their 20s or they're in their mid 20s who are really, really successful. And I've always thought it would be so great if you could come and talk to some of these kids that I'm currently representing. We do not have a program designed like that right now, but we're thinking creatively about ways that we can engage whoever it is that might want to work with kids. We're vetting programs, we're vetting, any suggestions. And I think that that's an absolute great one, because I agree with you that children will respond better to peers, people who look like them, who've been in the same circumstances as them.
Can I tell you how blown away I am of all of the programs being led by the formerly incarcerated? I mean, we utilize these organizations to a T. I look to them for guidance on how to sentence them, create reentry plans. I am blown away by the information I receive from them. I receive good information from them to allow me to make decisions on sentencing. And so I know it's an important tool for me as it relates to adults, and I'm appreciative of having that community to educate me.
Because it's clear that we can see that it works with all of the, I'll use the words us helping us, but the formerly incarcerated, helping the formerly incarcerated. However, we're all adults, so we've got to have something for our young kids to be able to relate to each other. Because a lot of times looking at you as an adult, I'm probably fearful or I'm feeling judged or,
I agree.
And there is one, it's small, but Freedom Foundations, just formerly incarcerated men, mentoring teenagers.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing though with the men, with the men are with the boys. And I think that's a good thing because we have so many boys that don't have fathers or father figures. And I think they're welcoming to have a male in their life and trying to point them and guide them in good direction. But at the same time, though, I still, as if I was a youth, I still think I need another youth.
On that point, I know we're talking about the criminal legal system, but when we talk about these silos, it kind of leaves, I think Tenee said it best, a lot of folks are divesting from their responsibilities. So you got schools, certain charter schools, certain public schools, call the police hundreds of times a year for the same behavior and stuff I did, or that another kid's doing at another school where they handle with detention. Kid needs more school when he's acting up, not less. And so we have to make sure that when there's an IAP, when a kid has been identified, that we're putting some things in place before a shot is fired, before somebody is harmed, before the police are called. And I think to your point, other young people could be very instrumental in that.
My question is for Syrita. That entire area, all of those structures as it relates to the jailhouse and all of that was built on the old way. If you tear it down, what would you rebuild in the place of it?
That's a great question.
So I don't really believe in rebuilding in the sense of like, it's my choice to figure out what we need to rebuild or like put in the place of that. I am a person that I definitely believe that like, that's not, even though I work in this community, like that's not my community. If you ask me what I think we should build in Vacherie, I could tell you a million things that need to happen in Vacherie, right? So I think in order for us to really think about tearing those things down and what we would put in place, there has to be community involved with the community saying, this is what we need here. This is what has to happen here. And then from that, you then bring experts in who can build that thing, or places that have created that thing that they're looking for, they're searching for, to put inside of their community. I think the other thing is that a lot of times we feel like we can't not do something because we don't have an alternative. And what I do is I look at it and I say, if I walk up on a situation that morally makes me feel some kind of way, I go back to the kids, I walk up to a child that's being abused, I'm not gonna wait to interject and stop the abuse because I don't know if CPS is gonna come or if I'm gonna end up with this child. My thought is, save this child, we're gonna figure out the rest later. And I think a lot of times that when we are not personally affected by a situation, like in your day-to-day, it's easier to say, hey, we need to figure out something in the place. Like, I know that should not exist in this community. So we should tear it down and clear the land and figure it out, as we go. So, I mean, that's my answer.
I think that's also, I love that. And I think it's important for me that the community invest in the system, not when the news just flash like 10 people killed, but have continuous conversations about the system. It's really interesting that people are not impacted, talk about the system unless their loved one is affected or become a defendant, right? And so I think it's important for us to engage the community, educate the community, and make sure that they understand that they're our bosses, that we look to them for some guidance on how we should proceed. And I think that backs up the point that Syrita was saying, is that the community is responsible for how they want to see this. Like, people were talking about, how did Jason get elected? Well, the community determined that he had something to say, and that's who they wanted to lead. And I think it's really important, and you see some amazing things when people are engaged in a conversation. But it has to be continuous. We can't wait till election time to do it. It has to be continuous, and we can't wait for bad things to do it to force us to say, I'm going to be tough on these people. There's a difference between somebody who committed a violent act and a violent person, and we have to stop merging it, and we have to decide what we want in our communities.
And then also how we as a community and the legal system define violence, because I was convicted of committing a violent crime, but my crime of violence was against a building. So I was violent against a building, but I'm labeled and termed, and I had access to a lot of different things because I was considered a violent, I always say committed a violent offense, but you're absolutely right. They merged the two, but also how we talk about violence.
They only merge the two for certain people, because Dylan Roof gets a bulletproof vest and gets drive-through on the way to the,
Absolutely. A question for you, Jason, that came about is post-conviction relief and these statutes, this 930.4 and this 930.10. And how are you thinking about using those in order to get to the root of certain things that maybe the legal system can't address? It wasn't necessarily like a legal issue, but a person showed up, to have their day in court, and there were things that were happening in the background that allowed them to be presented in a certain light. So those things that are like morally wrong, but may not be legally wrong, or just things you have timed out, you can't find information on anymore. One of the questions that came up is, how are you using those two statutes, and you can tell people exactly what they are?
So first of all, a lot of times, because we got a limited amount of time, the legal system will throw up these buckets, right? Like, or you can do this for this case, you can do this for this case, which means you can't do anything for these other things, which is why, and why I wanted Emily to come and do this work with me, is because we looked at every other DA's office in the country, and they have these things called conviction integrity units. She's like, well, Jason, we cannot call this a conviction integrity unit because there's no integrity in any of these convictions, right? And maybe it's because she's from a different place, right? So she's not looking at it as Americans maybe always look at it. But the Civil Rights Division is looking at anything that has occurred in that case that is deserving of review. And it really covers those two articles and many, many more: excessive sentences, overuse of the habitual offender law. Because one of the biggest shocks for me when I went to the first Louisiana District Attorneys Association, they were like, I hope you don't think we were like Leon. We don't use habitual offender law like that. And I started asking them some questions about it. And you know why they weren't using habitual offender law that way? Well, one, New Orleans is a very dark, predominantly African-American city. And in these smaller jurisdictions, DAs knew the defendants. They knew their families. They knew something about them. There was a coach. And so they weren't using it. So our process, if anybody comes to us or if we discover their case, we will look at it, and we're trying to lay out a system so that lawyers, pro se, counsel, whatever it is, they have an opportunity to have redress in the criminal legal system today through our office, because we can't just look at cases moving forward. We have to reckon with the sins of the past. There are so many in this city, and the reason why people did not want to respond to subpoenas or come to court to testify wasn't because they were scared of people all the time. Sometimes they were scared of the system. They didn't trust the system. And so we're trying to rebuild that trust by giving all of the avenues space. So we have an appellate division that's dealing with the specific legal claims, but the Civil Rights Division is looking at everything, including police officers who have in the past maybe committed crimes themselves and harmed individuals, or convicted individuals who were acting out of racial animus.
Oh. So first, let me say this. This is why I messed with Syrita, because Syrita is humble. That's my girl. To be able to, first, my name is Tueri. I'm the executive director of Button by Design. To be able to say that I'm not from here, and so it's up to the people. I can say what I know about Vashry, where my people from too, is amazing. I'm born and raised in New Orleans. I'm a charity baby. And I've lived in 3 different cities and 3 different states. And I'm humble everywhere I go. When I get there, when I live there, how can I be of service to you? And that's what she's shown. That's why I love her. Other people come here, not everybody, but some people come here and want to take over our city. And they never ask, what do you need? How can we be of service? What have you been doing? I was born into activism. I was born into it. I come from a family of it. I'm an educator by training. That is my training. And I run a nonprofit. I've been doing this work around incarceration since I was 20 years old, starting with the Angola 3 Coalition. So this is my blood work. So Tenee, we've talked before. A couple of things. I'm just been writing some notes. I think that one of the things, not one of, but a bunch of things that we could talk later about it too. When we look at these organizations, we have to be honest about too the fact that some of these organizations want to be the end all or be all, right? They want to be everything to everything. They cannot. We clear with our organizations. We do 8 things. That's it. People try to push other stuff on us. We're not doing it. So they get mad with us. I don't care. We do these 8 things. That is it. That's all. That's it. I think that using peers is amazing. I also think that using people who've been through this experience is amazing, right? I was arrested 4 times as a juvenile. 4 times. I wore an ankle brace and all of that. The whole thing. Had a probation officer who popped up on me at work and school, the whole 9. In our organization, we have 2 brothers who are incarcerated at 15. One of them did 50 years and one of them did almost 28 from the age of 15. So that's very different from being incarcerated as an adult, right? So they understand. They also have been trained to do work because we train, right? So I think that when we talk about we want to invite, I think it's amazing to want to invite a bunch of organizations to do the work. They have to be not just educated, they have to be trained to do this work. That's why they end up falling off. That's why there's no consistency. I think it's also important that we create the narrative, right? We can't keep using the buzzwords, right? Like, I don't believe in informed trauma. It's ongoing trauma for my community. It's consistent, it never ends, right? How can you be informed about that? I'm not informed, and I'm educated. I'm not informed about something that's constantly happening, right? I don't know who's watching my 6, right? So those things are important. That training is critical. So we could welcome them. We partner with, and I call names, I can't say this one. We partnered with Travis Hill a few years ago. And before my staff could go in, you were trained to go in. Because I had the training to be able to train them to go in, to work with them. It was art-based, but you are still going into this place, into this space. You're working with Black children. First and foremost, these are your Black New Orleans children. Very different. Black New Orleans children, right? Who we are trying to engage them in art, but like Syrita, I want you to engage them in love first, right? I need you to have love over here. I need you to have your art over here, but I need you to understand that this is still prison, that they are being traumatized by every single day. What does that look like? What does that mean to you first? So you are clear what that means to them having to live it every day. Those are just some of the things that we have to say when we're doing this training. So make that be a part of your process so we're still not beating this dead horse on what that needs to look like. They have to be trained because we can love them all day long, right? But if you're not, as soon as I graduated from college, I went right back to high school, I taught it. One of the so-called worst high schools in the city, Francis T. Nichols. I went back and taught at Douglas, one of the schools I was instrumental in helping to change the name of. The school that my mama fought to change from a Confederate flag to a mascot to the Bobcats. To this day, it's still a Bobcats. The thing is that I had to go back to school because I didn't go to school for education. So I had to go back to school to get the training. I love children, but I had to go back to school to get the pedagogy, right? So I could put it in proper practice. And I think that's the key that you need. And we could talk about that some more.
No, I think that you're absolutely right. And to be clear, there have been many organizations who have reached out to the district attorney's office. We don't categorically partner with whoever just shows up. I'm very protective of children. People have to be licensed, right? They have to have a program that is proven to work, right? A program that it has been vetted, not just by me, right? I'm not an expert. So it is not just me just meeting with people and saying, come and work with our children, right? Because I 100% agree with you. People need to be trained to work with children, and programs need to be vetted before we allow people to come in and work with our children. I really want to continue this conversation with you because I think that you have obviously very, very valuable institutional knowledge about
as
these
long
things.
as you're doing the vetting, because vetting always look like vetting for.
Right. So we need organizations that are going to have people who are culturally competent as well, right?
Yeah,
not everybody can come in and work with our children.
Absolutely.
I'm very conscious of that, and I agree with you 100%.
I want to be able to make sure that everyone has a chance to ask questions, but I also want to give them an opportunity to eat as well. So if we are able to get up and I know I want to eat and I want to drink. I want to see what Jessica cooked up for us. So I want y'all to also have the same opportunity. So I want to get to y'all questions, but then also know that everybody's not running out the door. I think Nandi does have a hard stop at 1. She has somewhere to be, but outside of that, we'll still be in this room for a little while.
My question is for Jason. I heard you say that one of the members of the DOJ referred to what you're doing as progressive. Do you think what you're doing is progressive? And if it is, have you calculated what the end result is going to actually be from what you're trying to achieve?
So Nandi and I had this conversation the other day. I was like, people want to throw the term progressive around when it comes to DAs, but nobody does it with doctors. If you have a brain tumor, you want the most progressive doctor who is steeped and trained with the best practices that exist around the country. But somehow in the criminal legal system, we're okay with somebody practicing the same way they did in 1942, right? So I'm progressive in the sense that everything should evolve, everything should get better as a society moves forward. And you asked me the end goal. I'm naive enough to believe that we can make an exponential impact on what was going on in New Orleans in terms of going from a place with the highest incarceration rate and the highest exoneration rate. I know that we can look backwards and we can go as far back when Lyndon Baines Johnson was president to deal with the forgotten men who were told they were going to be out in 10 years and 6 months. We can address those men and they can see freedom in their 70s and 80s. We can do that. We can address non-unanimous juries. We can address people rotting in jail for 2 spliffs or 3 T-shirts or an umbrella. We can bring those folks back to community and rebuild trust and have people being willing to believe in the system. But I also know that there's going to be work that is going to take 10 and 20 years because it took us 300 to get here, right? So where it ends, I don't know. I probably won't be around for it, but I know it's going to be a lot better for Xavier, Graham, and Zoe than what I found.
Anybody?
How you doing? My question is for Mr. Jason. My name is Adrema Dickerson. Of course, I'm a convicted felon. So my question is, I came in late, so I apologize for that. But also too, I walk in on the part when you were speaking on people's minds being stuck, and I wanted to just point out, in a sense, that can be true, whether you're 20, 30, 40, 50. If you taken away from society at a young age and be put into a box, literally, your mind is stuck, and it's on you as an individual to grow or try to grow yourself, you know, under the circumstances. Also too, my question is like, at what point will convicted felons get the opportunity for expungements of anything of those natures? Because with me, I'm only going to speak on me for right now. With me, I was wrongly convicted by the district attorney and my court appointed. You know, when we speak on communities, speaking from poor Black people who get caught up in the system, and at that particular time, 2000, you had a district attorney just wanted a conviction. So if you don't know anything about the law whatsoever, and it's your first offense, you're gonna do what you think comes natural, and plus you putting your trust into a court-appointed attorney and you take a plea bargain. So when you go for expungements of anything like that, it's like, oh, you took a plea, that's yours, nah, don't worry about it. Or not just that, when you go and say, hey, I want a expungement. What's the crime? Oh, felony. Oh, no. So my thing is, at some point, when do people will actually sit down and read the docket master? Because me personally, I had a co-defendant. I got a docket master with my name, I ain't even on it. I'm on page 3 saying sentence 2, what did I actually do? So, you know, I have spoken to a lawyer in the past that said my sentence was illegal. I'm cool with that. I've done the time, I'm past that. I'm at this point to where, how can we correct the city of New Orleans wrongdoing? You know, and one more thing. Recently, I was employed with the Superdome for 10 years. I got out of prison in 2008. That was my first job. Worked there for 10 years. And of course, when you spoke on retaliation, discrimination, color, race, whatever it may be, I filed a federal lawsuit against the company and quit. 3 months after they got the notice of the lawsuit, they put a warrant out for my arrest. And my question was, how can any judge sign a warrant with no evidence, no proof, no nothing? So in a sense, that's another form of retaliation. But when you have something pending in federal court and the company take and put it in criminal court, that wash away all that. So I ended up, district attorney ended up dropping the charges. Of course, they didn't have nothing against nothing, but it took a whole year and a half I had to go through. I lost my job, I lost everything. And not only was it thrown out and dismissed, I'm thankful for that. Well, this time around, I knew the law. So it was thrown out or whatever, but when we get arrested, it still shows. You know, so now I look like, oh, this girl here, she's a criminal. And it's really like false allegations, you know? So it's a lot when it comes to rebuilding our communities. It have to start with some of your adults that's willing to put the work in, the groundwork to save our children. And when it comes to our children, I tell people when I go out to speak to organizations, I tell people, these same children I'm running behind chasing, I'm gonna need them children to hold the door for me when I get old, because I'm gonna get old. Whether I be a felon or not, I'm gonna get there. And I tell people all the time, I'm not gonna give up, I'm gonna continue to fight. I might not see the change, because you said it could take 20, 30 years. I might not see it, but my people behind me will. My daughter will, you know. So for me, it's us as adults, we have to come together. And some of us as adults, we need the same system who convicted us to do something, reverse it. Because we did the time, we come home on parole, probation, you know, we could successfully complete that. Then you move on and it's still like, okay, not only did I have 2 cuffs on, now I still got 1 on. I still got 1 on because I can't go to college. I can't get a good job.
I can't do nothing.
You're absolutely right. Ms. Dickinson, I completely agree with you. I've been lobbying the Louisiana District Attorneys Association to get on board with the Fresh Start initiative, which really hopefully will lead us to a point where we have automatic expungements, where people have to come up with money, where people don't have to show up in court. Because I feel like if everybody says you have a debt to pay, when you pay a debt, there's nothing hanging over your head. So there should not be, you shouldn't have to go through hoops and hurdles to go get the expungement. You shouldn't have to worry that you're going to get fired 5 years after serving whatever your debt was, because now somebody finds out you paid a debt. Doesn't make any sense. It's patently unfair. A lot of people on my side of the aisle throughout the state are pushing against that. We had a vote about, there's a law that passed, beautiful law, that said felons can serve on juries. I think that makes sense, right? But inside of my association, you hear people going, no, I don't want a felon on the jury. I was like, well, wait a second now. I hear you, all of you all say, pay your debt to society. When you pay it, it's done. It's settled. And if you can never settle a debt, then why pay it? Right? That's what I thought. And they came on board and they agreed to that. But we've got to get to a point where we take the traps away, because this whole concept that you walk around with that label after it's supposed to be settled is just bondage. It is stopping. You can't get financial aid. You can't get certain housing. You can't get certain work. So I'm 100% on board with you, and we're gonna keep pushing to make that happen.
But you ain't gotta check the box on the college application no more, so you ain't, that's not true, you can go to school. And they removed the question off of the FAFSA now, so you don't have to check the question on the FAFSA for the financial aid form anymore, and they cannot discriminate against you because you had a drug conviction. So that is work that we've done in the last 2 years.
That's
so
big work.
if you wanna go to school, go to school.
That's big work.
Go to school.
Yeah.
That's big work.
Syrita, I'm sorry, I'm trying to deliver that wrong. What I wanted to.
No, I just wanted to.
It's the certification.
Yes, so licensure, absolutely, licensure. So that's the next one.
Some of the hurdles are down.
Licensure.
Some of the hurdles are down.
Licensure, yeah.
I have a question, and I know Tenee, I'm sitting here, I have two great nephews that's here, one right there, Tenee.
I'm sorry, doctor, do you mind if I get something? Okay.
The other is Dominic, two young African American males, that I'm grateful to God has no criminal. So, but they're targets. They're absolutely targets. So have you all thought about before?
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
You know, that is, that really is, that's where the real work is. Because we are getting to the point where we have judges and DAs and ADAs who understand once a case gets there, how to make sure that that's a fair process. But there's so many young people. So when I said earlier that I grew up in Atlanta and New Orleans, I brought that up because when I would come, grab mom in Atlanta, dad in New Orleans, when I would come here in the summers and spend time with cousins, all my cousins got arrested. At some court, between being little and graduating high school, they all got arrested at least once or twice. And it was so common that they were numb to it. They just thought it was just growing up. They didn't do anything wrong. It was just the route between their school and their home. They got put in the car, sometimes went down, and like no conviction. But what are we doing up here, right? Because what we're doing is we're telling our kids that it don't matter if you're system involved, you're system involved because you're targeted, right? So that is the work of city council, mayor, teachers, educators, to make sure that we are putting mechanisms in place so that our kids don't find themselves targets. Because it's not good enough just to hope that that's going to get changed. I know, Nandi, I think you have a very
different view. I think it's the job of the communities. Gone are communities. So when I was raised, I couldn't do anything around the corner. I had 10 mothers, right? My neighbor was a mother, the next door neighbor's mother. We have to move in a way where we are electing people who are engaged in the community, right? And so it's okay. The mayor, the city council, I'm sorry, they don't really care about your nephew. They care about being elected, and they care about the people who are going to continuously fund their reelection. That is the priority, right? And we can go to them and say, look, I really would like to address race. I really want to address the fact that I live in Central City and I don't have any police presence, where if I walk 5 blocks in the Lower Garden District, they have private security. I really want to address the fact that I can't afford a private school for my child. And they have to, so communities, and that's, I keep going back to that, because if we don't adapt this community empowered model, what is going to happen is you will not get stuff unless you are involved in some sort of system. We should not allow that to happen. We should say, I want to be able to have quality education. I want to be able to have quality policing. I want to be able to own a home. And I don't want to have to get these services by being involved in some major system, right? And so the fact that your nephews have not been involved in the system mean that they have been embraced by a community that says, not today, not my boys, right? And so since everybody doesn't have the opportunity to be engaged in that, that's up to us. There's this model, like it takes a village. Literally, we are losing villages that should be protecting our children. And that is the most important factor. Yeah, we should hold our elected officials accountable, but we should not make them the end all and end all. We must do it ourselves.
My question is for the judge. How would you define?
Nandi. And I don't do that to be rude, but I realize that I have to train people, right? Because I come from a long line of judges who like to be called judges, who think that is an important thing. And so I just want to train. My name is Nandi. My father named me after Shaka Zulu's mother. It is important to me. My first name is important to me. And I didn't expect that if when I was elected, I had to change my first name. So I don't mean to be rude. I just want to train people to call me Nandi.
I apologize.
It's okay.
How do you define community? Because I do think that has been a umbrella term for not truly understanding how individuals are actually operating. Mm-hmm. Because many of the communities in which you probably describe are more individualistic mm-hmm. than anything, because you have cultural diversity, mm-hmm. you have inclusion, you have all of these different things. And so I heard the common denominator around the room was when you're talking to children, of course, their peers are 100% influential in that, because that's who they're being influenced by. Mm-hmm. So your definition of community, I would like to know how you would actually define that. And if you are defining it from the older sense, meaning traditional, not older as anyone, but from the traditional sense, what are the mediating institutions that go along with that idea that you have about community?
So I look at communities in kind of a global way. Like if we are not only concerned with what goes on with us, if we're concerned with what is happening with our neighbor, that in turn is going to make sure that my quality of life improves, right? If my neighbor is eating every day and have quality education, then that's going to improve my quality of life. So I look at it globally, and I tell people, when you have kids, there's nothing wrong. I have a lot of people. Recently, a young man who I represented called me and asked me to be the godmother of his baby. And this blew me away. And I said, yes, because what I heard was, I want you to be a part of my child's community, right? I want my child to be surrounded by people that are going to empower them, that's going to support them through this this journey that's going to be rough because it's going to be a little black kid. So we already know it's going to be rough, right? And so I don't look at community like, oh, I live in Central City, so my community is here. I invite people to look at it more globally, right? Locally, look at it where if I know I have a household and I have 2 nephews and they don't have a lot of male experience, who could I call on, right? Who could I call on to spend Saturdays with them, right? Recently, I met with some of my neighbors because we've had all these piles of garbage since Ida and nobody cares, but you walk 5 blocks and all the garbage is gone. So we sat and we met, right? And we decided, this informal group that's not named, that we were going to harass 311, right? So a community for me is anybody who's empowered to ensure that everybody is well taken care of. Because believe it or not, I don't care if you're living in a great house, driving a great car, and have a great job. If your neighbors are not doing great, then you are not doing too great. And so we have to think about, I want for myself, but I want to be in a position where everybody is doing well. It's a good feeling to know everybody's being educated. Everybody has access to jobs. Everybody's going to get a fair play when they go into court. And so we have to start thinking about that and not in this selfish notion where I just need to make sure, because sometimes it's hard to think about other people because it's a grind thinking about yourself. And I connected back to the criminal justice system because people are only concerned in the system when it's directly affecting them. And we have to get out of that and think about it as a community.
So I'm sorry, y'all. If we got 20 minutes, I'm gonna make sure I'm out for that everybody can see.